It's just
Yeah.
erroring out for me.
Yeah, I'm going to leave and come back in a second.
Okay, so while that's happening, I'm going to scroll through these cities and towns because I love to see where folks are joining us from. Longview, New Braunfels, that's where my daughter lives. Welcome, Kathleen. And Santa Fe. Welcome from Santa Fe. New York, Granite Shoals. Haven't been out there in a while. Washington, D.C. Mary Jane, are you in Washington, D.C.?
I am.
Yes.
I am in Washington, D.C.
Perfect. And let's see what else we have. Lake Jackson, Ennis, Texas. Burleson. I think that just about covers all of Texas. I'm thinking we have representation from all the regions. Okay, we can get this Facebook thing figured out. We can get underway. We like to stream to Facebook because that gives us a recording of the event. So it's something that we try to do so that if the folks who registered weren't able to join us tonight, we can email them a link and they can watch it on their own time. Plus, it's nice to have. You could share it with people that you know. You could share it with your friends or family, anyone that you know who might be interested in this topic. You can just share the link with them.
And it's working now, Christy, so you're good to go.
Okay, great. So we can move on. Sorry about that, guys. Appreciate your patience. All right.
I lost you for a while. I'm back now. But...
Okay. If everybody can put their microphones on mute, thank you so much. I appreciate that. That just helps me stay focused, keeps me from getting distracted. All right, so we are so glad that you stopped by tonight for tonight's event, one of the best states of all, Rusell Lee's photography of Texas, 1939 to 1959. As I mentioned, I'm Christy Peliquin, the development manager for the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission, and I'm joined by Anjali Zucci. She's going to be helping out over on Facebook Live. Anjali is the executive director of the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission. As always, we're hoping that you'll get a chance to know us a little bit better through these events. We are the nonprofit partner to the state agency, Texas Historical Commission. And in our role, we provide support for historic preservation efforts across the state. You can learn more about us by visiting our website, thcfriends.org. We'd love for you to get involved with what we do. I want to thank those of you who have chosen to support us tonight with donations through these virtual events. Please know we see every donation, whether it's $1 or $25. We're grateful for your participation and support. It helps us bring these events to a wide public audience, so thank you. I want to acknowledge our THC commissioners, our Friends board members, as well as some of our colleagues at the Texas Historical Commission who are here with us tonight. We're always happy to see you. Thank you for joining us. If you haven't already, please follow us on social media. This is a great way to find out about all the cool stuff that we have going on. And it's also how you can find out about our next virtual events. In March, on the 28th, we will have a virtual event called Uncover the Hidden Stories of Route 66. You can register for that through our website. Again, that's thcfriends.org, and I will drop a link into the chat here in just a minute. A few housekeeping items before I introduce tonight's speaker. As I mentioned, it's always helpful if you please keep your microphones on mute. Tomorrow morning, everyone who registered for this event will get an email from me. It will include a link to a recording of tonight's event, as well as a list of any resources that our presenter might mention. We'll share those with you. So I will mention sometimes our emails end up in people's spam folders or junk folders. So if you don't see my email by about tomorrow, maybe about 4 o'clock, please check your spam folder. It's probably in there. One final note, while the presentation is taking place, we would love for you to put questions that you have for our presenter into the chat. And we will get to as many of those questions as we have time for at the end of her presentation. All right, that was a lot of talking, but I'm ready to move us along towards our speaker. I wanted to mention that if you're in Austin, you might want to stop by Rusell Lee Elementary School. Humanities Texas has kindly helped us with an exhibit of Rusell Lee photos. So if you're interested and you're in Austin, I definitely recommend stopping by Rusell Lee Elementary School to check out that exhibit, and do it fast because it is closing this coming Friday. So. And if you're curious and want to know more about that, please feel free to email me. Okay. So I'm seeing, Mary Jane, I'm seeing your desktop.
Nope, not mine.
Okay, I'm not sure who is sharing their screen, but please discontinue sharing your screen. Okay, let me figure out how to help with this. Let me see if I can tell. Anjali, do you, from the host side, could you help us out?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Is this Ed Lear that is got this?
I figured it out.
Ah,
This case,
Okay, I think we
yeah.
fixed it.
okay.
Okay, tonight's just one of those nights. It's just one of those nights, and we're just gonna get through this and do the best that we can. So anyway, okay, so now it is my privilege to introduce tonight's speaker. Mary Jane Appel is a historian of American social documentary photography and has worked with image collections in archival and curatorial capacities at various institutions, including the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian Institution, and Texas State University. She is the author of Rusell Lee, A Photographer's Life and Legacy, and co-author with Douglas Brinkley of a forthcoming work called American Coal, Rusell Lee's Portraits. She lives in Washington, D.C., and we are honored to have her here tonight. Mary Jane, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Feel free to go ahead and share your screen.
All right. All right. Do you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am. Looks
Okay.
great.
Okay. Let's see. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Christy, for that great introduction. It's really my pleasure to be here, and I'm so happy to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about Rusell Lee and the work he did in Texas. Lee's photographs of Texas are really central to his life and to his career. They're an important part of his work for the Farm Security Administration, or FSA. He photographed for the FSA in 29 states, but nearly 20% of his FSA work is concentrated in Texas. I considered Texas so critical to understanding Lee that in my recent book about Lee's FSA work, I devoted an entire chapter to Texas, and the cover photograph is from San Marcos. Texas is also a critical part of Lee's post-war work, and most of his photographs from this period depict subjects in and around Texas. Lee's first visit to Texas was in January of 1939. By then, he had already seen and traveled through much of the United States. But a few months after he arrived in Texas, he wrote to his boss, Roy Stryker, back in Washington, D.C., "I'm anxious to take you on a trip through Texas. It's one of the best states of all." I want to start with a little background on Lee and how he found his way to Texas. Lee was born into a wealthy family of landowners in the small town of Ottawa, Illinois in 1903. He had a traumatic childhood. His father left when he was about 7, and when he was 10, his mother was killed when she was hit by a car in front of him. He then had a series of legal guardians throughout his adolescence, and they sent him to Culver Military Academy in Culver, Indiana. Lee studied chemical engineering at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And this is where he was really trained to visualize the world, where he formulated what became his approach to photography. And we'll see that scientific training in a lot of his photographs. Lee graduated from Lehigh in 1925 and moved back to Illinois, where he became a successful chemical engineer. In 1927, Lee married a local artist named Doris Emmerich, and within a few years, he transformed his life. He left chemical engineering to become a painter, which he could afford to do because he had inherited significant family wealth. And he and Doris moved in artistic circles. They traveled to Europe multiple times, and eventually they moved to New York. They spent winters in New York City and summers at the artist colony in Woodstock. They found their new life and their new community stimulating and inspiring, and we can see that in these experimental portraits they made of themselves in the early to mid 1930s. Doris Lee became a noted American scene artist, and on the right, I'm showing you a photograph of her sketching one of her mural commissions. Rusell Lee attended the Art Students League in New York, and he studied painting with the American artist John Sloan. Sloan was a member of the Eight and a leader of the Ashcan School, though he hated that term. And Sloan depicted scenes of daily life in New York's working class neighborhoods. He made portraits of ordinary Americans. He painted simple reflections of city life and scenes of the ordinary and everyday, like McSorley's Bar in 1912. Sloan taught his students design, composition, and lighting, and he illustrated his lectures with the work of Western art masters, Rembrandt, Van Gogh, Matisse, and one of his favorites was the French artist Honoré Daumier. And Sloan admired Daumier's humanistic approach, the way he ennobled working class citizens in Paris, and the way he depicted downtrodden men and women with decency and respect, as we can see here in Third Class Carriage. Lee later recalled Daumier's work as a tremendous influence. Lee studied with Sloan at the Art Students League for 5 years, but he really struggled with the mechanics of painting, especially portraiture. And so in 1935, he bought a camera because he thought it might help with his painting. Let's see, there we go. He photographed in and around New York, and he started thinking about the documentary capacity of photography. He was drawn to depicting the day-to-day lives of people and scenes of the Depression. And here I'm showing you a photograph of unemployed workers in New York City that Lee made in the winter of 1935, 1936. And it's easy to see in this photograph how Lee absorbed John Sloan's lessons in aesthetics and critical visual analysis. Excuse me, he captured the despair of these men. They're a group with a common purpose, but Lee manages to convey a sense of isolation rather than solidarity. And he used light and space to blend the narrative with the composition. The figures are moving from left to right, from daylight into darkness. So through John Sloan, Lee had developed a painter's eye, but photography became his medium of expression, the way that he recorded and interpreted the world around him. He documented other effects of the Depression on the American people. So in addition to unemployment lines, he photographed labor strikes, public sales, and bootleg coal mining. And I want to mention that Lee understood from the beginning the value in getting his photographs seen by the public. He worked to have them published in national magazines, like this spread in Collier's, which features Lee's bootleg coal mining photographs. Today, I'm showing you a number of examples of his photographs in print, at work, and out in the world. In 1936, Lee took these photographs of bootleg coal mining to Washington, D.C. to get a job on what was to become the most famous documentary photography project in America. The Farm Security Administration, or FSA, photography project was directed by a man named Roy Stryker, an economist from Columbia University. And Stryker oversaw a team of men and women to document the country's rural problems and the government's programs to address them. It's not surprising at all that Lee would seek out this job. He was definitely an artist on the left, like many of his friends in New York, and he was a Roosevelt supporter and a fervent New Dealer. He had a deeply instilled social conscience, and he wanted to use photography to affect social change. He described his favorite subject matter as work in the public interest. Lee worked on Stryker's project for 6 years, from 1936 to 1942, and the two men formed a really successful working relationship and a lifelong friendship. Lee set out in the fall of 1936, and he started to document many of the country's agricultural problems, which were really intertwined with the country's ecological catastrophes. So on the left is a dust storm overtaking a farm in North Dakota. At the top right is an organ stranded in an Indiana cornfield, carried there by the 1937 Ohio River flood. And on the bottom right is cut over or deforested land in Michigan, which was being sold as farmland. At their heart, though, Lee's photographs are always about people, the owner of that barn and livestock, which was now engulfed in dust, the musician who once played that organ, and the farmer who had no choice but to try and salvage that cut over land. Lee had a gift for relating to people. He had a charisma, a magnetism, an amazing ability to draw people out and to put them at ease. And the people he photographed recalled decades later how much they took a liking to him. They felt they knew him and they trusted him. And that trust is really clear in his early portraiture. A mother and child being helped by the FSA in Missouri, a young girl waiting for her father at a general store in Louisiana, a father and his son moving to a new farm sponsored by the FSA, a woman displaced by the Great Ohio River flood, a man taking a pause from his job at a cotton gin in Arkansas, the daughter of a farmer in North Dakota in front of her sod home. Lee wanted to show us how people lived, and he photographed their homes and their living conditions. And Lee was a master of comparative observation, which we can see here, and it was rooted in his scientific training. He captured vernacular architecture across the country, and he photographed all of these houses in middle ground to show us similarities and differences. And he really used the frame of the image to give us a sense of place. These are just a few that he photographed from 1936 to 1938 in Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, North Dakota, Minnesota, Maryland, Missouri, and Louisiana. He's taken a universal problem and presented it from his perspective. And I'm showing them to you here to give you a sense of his working method, but also to illustrate the ground that he covered. People opened their homes to Lee, and they shared the details of their lives. And for Lee, the details were important. But most houses he visited had no electricity, like this house in Missouri in 1938, and many had no windows. So Lee pioneered an innovative flash technique early in his career, which he used to reveal these spaces, not to aestheticize them. He wants us to see the details, the newspaper covering the walls, the kerosene lamp sitting on the dresser, the uneven wooden floor reflected in the broken mirror. And Flash helped him to capture those details, and I'll talk a bit more about his technique when we get to Texas. I'm also sharing this photograph with you because it's a really great example of how important gestures were to Lee. And in this case, the gesture of a sharecropper's son combing his hair. Lee often developed a rapport with his subjects, and they often participated in making the photograph. In a 1970s interview with Texas Monthly magazine, Lee talked about making this photograph. He told the magazine, "In one tenant farmer's house, I saw a bureau with a mirror, and I asked this little boy what he did at that mirror. I comb my hair," he said. "Let me see," I said. So he walked over and showed me. When you think about a Rusell Lee photograph, when you look at it, keep in mind the angle he chose and where he went to get it. He was intrepid. He went wherever he needed to get his shot. For example, to make this photograph on the left of lumberjacks on the bank of the Little Fork River in Minnesota in 1937, Lee stripped down to his underwear and jumped in the water. And Roy Stryker, who was traveling with him in the field, snapped the picture of Lee on the right. Lee's life changed in the fall of 1938 when he was in Louisiana working with the Federal Writers Project and making photographs for the WPA State Guide. He traveled around the state documenting historic sites, industries, various towns. And here I'm showing you a spread from the guide with a few of Lee's photographs. On a trip to New Orleans, Lee met the friend of one of the writers, a woman from Texas named Jean Smith Martin, who would eventually become his second wife. Jean was born in Vernon, Texas, and grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. She wanted to be a writer, so she got a job with the Dallas Times-Herald. She married a reporter, but left him after a few years and moved to New Orleans in the mid-1930s. When she met Lee in the fall of 1938, she recalled an immediate mutual attraction. She went with him on some of his jobs for the WPA Guide. For example, they went to a roadhouse in Raceland, about 40 miles outside of New Orleans, and Lee made the photograph on the right, a portrait of Jean standing next to a sign that says, "I'm waiting for you." Jean was a fellow New Dealer, and she shared Lee's social reform vision. And after knowing him only a few weeks, she packed up and she left with him. Now, in 1930s America, this was scandalous. Jean was still married to that reporter in Dallas. Lee was still married to Doris in New York. And to add another layer, the Lees had an open marriage, and a pretty public one too. Doris was involved with another artist in New York who was married to someone else. So all of this caused a big problem with the FSA, but Lee didn't care. He took Jean with him anyway. They got a lot of pressure from Washington, and Jean later recalled that a man from the State Department visited them in the field to make sure they got married. After about a year at the end of 1939, they divorced their spouses and they got married. But at the end of 1938, they bucked convention and they left Louisiana together and made their way to Jean's home state of Texas. When an FSA photographer arrived in a new area, Stryker's rule of thumb was to focus on a few key things: the agricultural patterns, the major industries, the population distributions, and the general characteristics of the land. And here I'm showing you one of Lee's photographs of that, the general characteristics of the land, cultivated land in the coastal plains in San Patricio County. And a lot of his photographs of Texas emphasize wide open spaces like this. After just a few weeks in Texas, Lee wrote to Stryker back in Washington, "There's going to be plenty to do in this state as it is so damn big and so diverse." When I first started my research on Lee, I got a 1930s road atlas of the United States, and I mapped out his travels and his assignments through every state that he photographed. If Lee was overwhelmed by Texas, I was bowled over by the breadth and the depth of the work that he did there. And here I'm showing you a picture of my atlas page from Texas and sharing it here with you. Over a 2-year period, Lee made 4 separate trips to Texas, and he documented various industries throughout the state, from cattle ranching in Spur to citrus harvesting in Weslaco, from oil drilling in Kilgore to loading cotton at the port of Houston. Lee was particularly fond of Texas Hill Country. And at the left is a road cutting through Kimball County, and at the right is the highway leading into Junction. For Lee, these roads must have been a dream. because he had spent much of the previous 2 years on narrow, unpaved roads, usually composed of dirt, and if he was lucky, they might have been covered in gravel or cinder. He battled icy, snow-packed roads, frost heaves, mud, the works. In Minnesota, he had to be towed off of a logging road by a lumberjack. And in Oklahoma, he got his car stuck in a cornfield, punctured his gas tank, and had to be pulled out by a team of mules. So imagine Lee's delight with roads like this. The highways in Texas inspired him to think about different ways of documenting. He took these photographs from the back seat of his car with Jane at the wheel, driving through Bexar County. As Lee was traveling the state on his FSA assignments, we can see he started to think about life and commerce along the highway. And on the left is a grocery store and filling station in the High Plains in Dawson County. And on the right is an oil and gasoline service station at night in San Augustine. After about a month in Texas, Lee wrote to Stryker, "What do you think about the idea of 24 hours in a hamburger stand along the road, actually spending the 24 hours and getting pictures throughout the day? It should be a rather swell cross-section of highway travel." At the top left is a hamburger stand in Alpine. At the bottom left is a hamburger stand with old brands in Dumas. And at the right is a lunch counter in Raymondville. And this photograph on the right shows us something else about Lee, and that's his mastery of flash that I hinted about a little earlier. I want to emphasize that flash photographs of this era did not normally look like this. Flash usually highlighted only the foreground and left the background in darkness. And this photograph really highlights Lee's technical proficiency. He's illuminated the entire space evenly, which gives us a depth of focus and an incredible level of detail. Lee created his own formulas, which gives his negatives these rich velvety tones. Lee often used flash to fill in available light and to achieve more depth, which is what he's done here. Or when he photographed bottles of milk at a creamery in San Angelo. Lee was always concerned about level of detail and what he called textural rendering in his photographs, like the weave of the burlap here. And he used flash to capture it all. To capture the action, the jerk in Corpus Christi, Lee used flash to freeze the scoop of ice cream in midair. So here he's made a photograph about time and movement. Lee worked with flash in two different ways. The first way was on the camera, and this photograph is an example of that. You can see the flash reflected in the glass. Lee preferred on-camera flash because it didn't require any setup and it could be swung into action at a moment's notice. He used flash on the camera, he estimated, about 70% of the time. The other way Lee used flash was off the camera, called extension flash. And with extension flash, Lee would hold the camera in one hand and the flash unit in the other. And he would direct the light in various positions and angles, above, in front, to the side, and below, so that he could create a finer modeling and a fuller view of the scene, like in this cottonseed oil mill in McLennan County. We can see here also his respect for specialized labor and his interest in the worker and in gestures that tell a story. I want to add that he chose images from this series and the previous one of the milk bottles to illustrate an article he wrote on flash in 1941. Lee usually set up and operated the flash unit himself, but when Jean joined him in the field, she sometimes held additional flash guns after Lee had strung the wires across the room. And in this photograph, Lee included Jean, She's on the left, and I've enlarged her a bit so that you can see her. Lee took this photograph later, a few years after his FSA work at a bowling alley in Virginia. But I wanted to share it so you could see Jean at work holding the flash gun and get a better sense of how Lee used multiple flash. Ramana Javits, the visionary librarian at the New York Public Library Picture Collection, once said that every Rusell Lee photograph is one word in a sentence. And this is really easy to see in his series work, like this one of a bootmaking shop in Alpine. It's also easy to see his interest in image narrative. He's showing us how something's made, and he made a lot of series like this for the FSA, constructing a garment in New Jersey, building a prefabricated house in Missouri, and fabricating and testing parachutes in California. And these are only 7 of about 70 photographs he made in this boot shop, documenting the different steps from all the parts that go into the upper to the finished boots in the store window. Store windows were a favorite subject for Lee. He once said the store window was indicative of the way of life in a particular community. Actually, it was a window into the community. For Lee, store windows point to important social and cultural events, like the window on the left at a department store in San Angelo during the Fat Stock show. It displays Western clothing for customers who, Lee tells us, adopt rodeo and rancher styles during the length of the show. His store windows are also studies of local economies and financial trends across the country, like the window on the right, which points to the area's shift towards mechanized farming, at a store in Brownwood where you could trade livestock for agricultural machinery. Stryker loved store windows too, and Lee later recalled that whenever Stryker would join him in the field and they got to a small town, Stryker liked to walk up and down the streets and comment about what was in each window and how it reflected that moment in time. And in this photograph, taken in 1939, as the country was recovering from the Depression, Lee shows us window shoppers in San Antonio looking at a display in a department store, which promises customers their purchase will help the nationwide drive to create jobs. Lee photographed hundreds of signs for the FSA across the country and in cities and small towns throughout Texas. Broadsides, posters, billboards, advertisements, and neon anything. He loved neon. He was fascinated with language and typography, and he especially enjoyed hand-lettered signs and American vernacular. For Lee, signs indicated the cultural, social, and financial status of the sign makers, as well as the community reading them. And Lee was especially attracted to entertaining promises, such as this sign in Sweetwater at the top left, where the ice water is cold as Amarillo, or the bottom left at a filling station in Waco, where Santa himself could help you buy Firestone tires on layaway, or a shoe shine parlor in San Antonio on the right, where the special service being offered is a little ambiguous. Lee was also drawn to colloquial language, like he found in Harlingen, at Buku Hamburgers, where you can get a burger for 5 cents, chili for 10, and every seat is filled. For Lee, signs reflected their place and their time. When people approached Lee in the field and asked why he was photographing a particular scene, Lee told them he was taking pictures of the history of today, and his extensive sign imagery demonstrates many of the cultural norms of his era. For example, he photographed a theater marquee in Waco, which was unexceptional in 1939, but today shows us the era's segregation. Lee later said that documenting the injustice of segregation was one of his personal objectives as an FSA photographer. Many of Lee's photographs and those of his FSA colleagues document the disparate treatment and discrimination in multiple states and the separate worlds inhabited by Black and white Americans during the segregated 1930s. In Texas, Lee also documented the separated world of another group of Mexican and Mexican American communities separated from Anglo communities. Lee really drives that point home visually here in this photograph, which depicts a house in a Mexican community on the outskirts of San Antonio. The central downtown and what's now called the Tower Life building is in the background, and a Mexican cemetery is in between. Lee ultimately undertook an in-depth and self-directed study of Mexican and Mexican-American communities in Texas. 20% of his Texas photographs relate to this disadvantaged group. And his singular focus on Mexican and Mexican-Americans in Texas really put him at odds with Stryker and other FSA administrators because he ignored his official farm security work. He surveyed a number of agricultural concerns employing Mexican and Mexican-American workers, many with discriminatory and unfair labor practices, like spinach in La Pryor, cabbage in Alamo, and citrus near Weslaco. Lee's sustained interest, though, was to document the living and working conditions of pecan shellers in San Antonio. And here I'm showing you on the left and right, men and women shelling pecans at a union factory. His captions note deficient lighting, and his photographs show poorly designed workstations. The laborers sit on backless wooden benches for hours on end. And the air inside many of these factories was thick with fine brown dust from pecans, which contributed to San Antonio's high tuberculosis rate, which was 3 times the national average. Lee always strived to create a comprehensive visual record, so he included commercial and social centers of these financially disadvantaged communities, stores and individuals providing goods and services, like this barber in San Antonio. While Lee was in Texas, Stryker wrote him about a talk he'd just given to the Photo League, a group of documentary photographers in New York. And Stryker's advice to League members really speaks to the heart of Lee's work. Stryker told them, "Get a problem and work all around it. Be sure your problem is one that has human beings involved. Look around and see where social and economic forces are in conflict, and there you will find good pictures." Lee really strived to create a comprehensive visual record of life in Texas. And part of that record was documenting the small town, which had been one of Stryker's longstanding goals. Lee made hundreds of pictures of small town life across the country, but none match his series on San Augustine, his famous look at that town in East Texas, which I really like to think of as a complex portrait of a town. And here is his view of the town square, which he took from the 3rd floor of the courthouse. And he captures the energetic pulse of the people in the square as residents pass through on their way to that next errand. They meet up in groups and they socialize. He enjoyed showing that personal interaction, that connection, the expressions, the gestures. Farmers in town on a Saturday afternoon catching up, or talking to the clerk as they inspect seed at the hardware store. And Lee frequently made multi-perspective views of a scene like this, and these views really speak to his scientific training and methods of observation. Lee often depicted the act of observation, of looking, of inspecting. He enjoyed making observation the subject of his image, often didn't show the faces. He wanted us to think about the act of looking. And he made scores of pictures like this. People looking at a handbill in Weatherford, a case of watches in Waco, penned cattle in San Angelo, or some great unknown beneath a sidewalk grate in San Antonio. Often for Lee, the subject of someone's gaze isn't nearly as important as the gaze itself. He turned his camera away from the action onto the people watching it. And on the left is a crowd lining the street in San Angelo watching a parade, which Lee gives us a hint of by including its shadow in the lower left corner. Or the West Texan on the right watching a horse auction in El Dorado. Lee's last trip to Texas for the FSA was in December 1940, and he went there to document the defense buildup in Corpus Christi, where the military was constructing a naval air training base. And Lee really enjoyed making pictures like this, framing dynamic lines, highlighting bold geometric shapes. He just couldn't help himself. The line of buses used to transport workers to the construction site on the left, and we see the construction site on the right. And in Lee fashion, he focused on the people, the men and women who worked to prepare the country for World War II. A workman at the Naval Air Base, family of a carpenter's helper in front of their trailer. Lee's photographs of Texas were widely published in a variety of newspapers, periodicals, and books, and they continue to be published decades after he took them. And here I'm showing you just 3 publications of the day. Travel Magazine published a lengthy photo essay on San Augustine. Survey Graphic featured his photographs of migrants, and McCall's magazine included his Corpus Christi pictures in a special defense issue as the country was preparing for World War II. Lee left Stryker's project in the fall of 1942 to direct the Overseas Technical Unit of the Air Transport Command. And this was a unit comprised of documentary photographers and filmmakers that flew in a special fitted B-24 Liberator, which had been modified to capture the vantage points of the pilot and crew from inside the plane. And on the left is Lee in front of his plane, and on the right is Lee and a member of his crew working on the ground at Roberts Field in Liberia. Lee's unit flew in advance of tactical military personnel on hundreds of untested Air Force routes in every strategic area of the war. Lee's unit often found itself flying blind to islands without runways, over uncharted mountain ranges where elevation maps could be off by thousands of feet. Lee's unit recorded hazards, approaches, and terrain characteristics like these on the screen. On the left is a U.S. air base in the Pacific Theater, and on the right is the Burma Road on a flight between Assam Valley and Kunming, China. By the war's end, the unit had created 300,000 photographs like these. After the war, Lee went back to Texas to rest and recuperate from some health problems he had developed during the war. His rest was short-lived, though, when the Truman administration approached him in 1946 to document the health and safety of bituminous coal miners as part of the historic Krug-Lewis Agreement. He joined a team of Navy personnel led by Admiral Joel T. Boone and traveled the country documenting bituminous coal mining communities in 13 states. On the left is a group portrait of Boone's survey team, and you can see Lee on the far right in civilian clothes. Lee's photographs were used in the landmark study, A Medical Survey of the Bituminous Coal Industry, which I'm showing you on the right. Lee's photographs from this assignment are the subject of an upcoming exhibition at the National Archives, and a book I co-authored with historian Douglas Brinkley, which comes out next month. After Lee finished his coal mines administration assignment in early 1947, he moved back to Texas with Jane, and they settled permanently in Austin. Over the next 15 years, Lee took on assignments that interested him. He photographed a wide range of topics for multiple clients. His assignments usually had some connection with Texas, and many of them were commercial. For example, Standard Oil New Jersey was a main client in the late 1940s. And the connection here was Stryker, who left Washington in 1943 to direct a documentary project at Standard Oil. And Stryker hired many of his FSA photographers, including Lee. Lee photographed in multiple states for Standard Oil and in other countries as well, but a lot of his work was centered in Texas, like this photograph of refinery storage tanks in Baytown, taken in 1949. And I just love how painterly this image is. It's just beautiful. Stryker and his Standard Oil photographers had a lot of autonomy. Their philosophy was that oil was connected with just about everything, like people attending a horse race in Fredericksburg in 1947 on the left, or a driver sleeping in his truck in Vernon in 1949 on the right. Standard Oil published a lot of Lee's photographs in The Lamp, their in-house publication, and here's a story Lee did on the lower Rio Grande Valley. Another commercial client was Fortune. Some of Lee's Fortune magazine assignments concern Texas. For example, in an article about American Airlines in the December 1951 issue, the magazine featured Lee's aerial photograph of Dallas Love Field, which is on the right. Also during the post-war years, through about 1960, Lee covered political campaigns, largely in support of Jane's involvement in Texas politics. Lee photographed Lyndon Johnson, JFK, Alan Shivers, and Henry B. Gonzalez. And one politician Lee photographed in depth was Ralph Yarborough. Between 1952 and 1957, he covered Yarborough's various election campaigns. And on the left is Yarborough's Senate campaign headquarters in Austin. And on the right are two photographs of campaign workers. Lee's coverage of the 1954 Texas primary campaign between Shivers and Yarborough appeared in the New York Times. Lee's photograph of Ralph Yarborough campaigning in Denison on the courthouse steps appeared on the cover of the magazine. Lee also developed a number of projects with the University of Texas during his post-war career. In 1949 and 1950, he worked with UT on a study of Spanish-speaking people in Texas. And this is really a continuation of the work he had done on his own 10 years before when he was working for the FSA. For the University of Texas, Lee photographed living and working conditions of communities in Corpus Christi, San Antonio, San Angelo, and El Paso. And this is just a sampling that I'm sharing here. A family moving to Wyoming to work in the sugar beet fields, a father and child, a girl in school, a veteran studying for night class, a shoeshine boy reading the newspaper. Another project with the University of Texas was a collaboration with UT professor William Arrowsmith, who was a specialist in Italian literature. And for a special issue of the university's Texas Quarterly called Images of Italy, published in 1961, they published a number of Lee's photographs taken in Italy. Lee's relationship with UT continued. In 1965, UT mounted a retrospective of Lee's work and then hired the art faculty as a photography instructor and Lee taught there until his retirement in 1973. Alongside the work he did for commercial clients and for the University of Texas, Lee continued to take on social documentary projects for himself and for publications like the Texas Observer, a progressive journal focused on issues concerning class, race, and social justice. For example, in the late 1950s, Lee photographed the state institutions at Rusk and Terrell for the Observer. And the images are truly haunting. I'm showing just two of them here. Ronnie Duggar, who was a founding editor of the Texas Observer, accompanied Lee on this assignment. And years later, he recalled the experience. Once we went together with a legislator to do a report on state mental hospitals. Faces could not be shown. I do not have to go get those pictures to remember them from years ago because they're so strong. People sitting along hallways doing nothing. A woman, her head twisting on her neck in some kind of anguish, alone in a cell. There they were. Russ looks for the human, and when he finds it, he photographs it at once. His photographs are technically superior, of course. They are moving because they are photographs of the human. Duggar was right, of course. People are at the heart of Lee's work. He photographed them with humanity, warmth, and candor. He captured their strength and their resilience, and that's why his photographs continue to move us. Lee created a lasting visual record of Texas, an epic portrait of his adopted state, and one that's Lee's own portrait as well. In Harlingen, a store window caught Lee's eye. The sign painted on the window, "Pay your tax now here," refers to the state's poll tax, which historically was a barrier to voting, used throughout the country by about 25 states. It was a way of disenfranchising many of the people Lee had been documenting, migrants, sharecroppers, and other financially disadvantaged people who couldn't afford to pay the poll tax. Lee could have minimized the reflections, as he did in other store window photographs, but here he emphasized them, blending the spaces, what's forward behind the glass, what's backward behind the photographer. And next to the call to action, hand-painted on the window, Lee included his own reflection and transformed this image into a complex self-portrait as he documented himself, documenting Texas. Thank you.
Mary Jane, thank you so much. That was incredible.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
The photographs were incredibly moving. I can't even say which one I liked the most because there were so many that just spoke to me.
Well, it was difficult to choose, really.
I'm sure. And I love the Texas focus. Loved seeing all the different towns, and I'm sure our audience loved that too. So I can't wait to hear the questions and to hear some of the discussion because I know our audience probably has a lot to share about this.
And I tried my best with the pronunciation, so please forgive me.
I think you did great. I think you did awesome. And thanks. I don't know, I know you're not looking at the chat, but there's a lot of love for your presentation and a lot of gratitude. So thank you so much.
Great.
Okay,
Great.
so I am going to start running through the questions now that are in the chat. So if you haven't already, please put whatever question you have for Mary Jane into the chat now, and we will kind of start with whoever's question was first, and we'll move down. And if we have time left over, maybe we'll see who might want to pop off mute and say hello. So, okay. So there were questions about the exhibit that's happening in Austin, and I think I answered that in the chat. If you have more questions about that particular exhibit, please check out Humanity Texas website. I put the link into the chat, and I will include it also when I send the email tomorrow. But Humanities Texas is kind of running that exhibit. I think I'm saying that correctly. So they would have more information about any further exhibitions of that. Let's see. We're scrolling to our questions. Oh, Anjali, did you want to share the photograph from the viewer over on Facebook Live who's
Yes,
the grandfather?
yes. Great grandfather.
Great grandfather.
Melissa Green Johnson is on Facebook Live with us, and we've been emailing back and forth, and she shared this incredible photograph that I'm going to share with you all in just a second. And I'm sure that Mary Jane, you will probably be able to recognize this. So this is at a mill. I think you showed a picture of the very same mill, and
the cottonseed oil mill.
Yes, this is
Wow.
inside that milk, and the person on the left, the tall gentleman on the left, is Melissa's great grandfather.
Oh my goodness.
This is a picture of the actual picture, so she doesn't have it, but it's in their family. So she wanted to share.
Wow. That's fantastic.
Melissa,
Thank you.
Thank you. That is an incredible photo. And I encourage you, if you have a connection to Rusell Lee, because I saw that when folks were registering, some of you were making little notes that you had been his student or that you were familiar with the photograph or something like that. So I encourage you to mention that in the chat. I'd love to hear things like that. Melissa was also curious about preserving this photo.
Yes.
Jane, do you have any input about how she can preserve that photo that she has?
Well, conservation is not really my area. I would suggest that she speak with a photo conservator.
And I will let Melissa know that there might be some folks at the Texas Historical Commission who might be able to help as well. So we'll try and connect her up with somebody here. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to questions. Let's see. Will the travel magazine issue with the article on St. Augustine be available online?
I bought a copy on eBay. So, yeah, you can, hold on one second.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And it is the March 1940 issue. So
I will
it should be easy to find.
I'm going to make a note of that, and I will include that in the email that I send out tomorrow. So March of 1949?
1940. March 1940.
Issue. Okay, got it. So hopefully that's out there and you can find that, Martha, because it does look really neat. Great question. Richard's asking, did anyone catch a note of Stryker's 4 areas of approach for photographers entering new areas? Agricultural, major industries, general characteristics of the land, and he's not sure of that last one.
Oh, let's see. I took that from a letter that he, let's see if we go. All right. Agricultural patterns, major industries, population distributions, general physical characteristics of the land.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then another question from the same person is, was it a seamless move into color photography or slow and problematic?
Well, the FSA and its I'm just going to say the FSA for ease. It actually had 3 different names, but they used color. They did do some color work for the FSA and for the OWI. And then Lee, not for World War II, not for his World War II work, but he did do some color work for Fortune and for some of his commercial clients. And he never really indicated that there was any difference for him, really. He was adept at both. So sometimes he would travel with one camera loaded with black and white and one camera loaded with color. And it would just depend on, the subject, whether he photographed in black and white or color.
That was a great question. Thank you, whoever
That is a
asked
good
that.
question. I've never
Yeah.
gotten that question
Yeah.
before.
And I don't think that I had thought of that, but that's a wonderful question. It's almost like changing mediums to go from black and white to color. I mean, it's a drastic sort of change. So, Pam is asking, are copies of Lee's photos available from the Library of Congress? She thinks that's true. Do you know?
Yes. So if you go to and I don't have the address here right now,
That
but
could be
if you go
something.
to the Princeton, I'll send it to you, and then you can send that out. But the Princeton Photographs Division at the Library of Congress has all of the FSA collection digitized, and so you can get them. That you can get high resolution files of most all of the collection, I think, online.
It's great to know. Yes. So tomorrow when I send the follow-up email about tonight's presentation, I will try to include links or at least some information that you can maybe do some research on your own. I know these events get everyone very excited in wanting to know more about the thing that's being presented. And so I know a lot of our audience members are like me. They get a taste of it in the presentation, then they want to go do their own research and learn more. So any resources you can share with us would be great. Jerry, this is just a comment. They're saying, thank you for this special treat. I've admired Rusell Lee's work for many years, and this presentation really brought a lot of light to his background. So thank you. Let's see, Allie's asking, I had not heard in detail about his flash techniques before, not asking, just stating. And I thought that was very interesting as well. Because there are these interior spaces that you see in his photography that you don't see elsewhere. Martha, we got the data that issue for you. Let's see.
Excuse me, could I make a
Yes.
comment about his flash?
Please do.
Well, I don't know if Steve Clark is on this Zoom meeting, but he and I used to go over to his house over on West Avenue in the early 70s. I was in graduate school in physics, and but I was interested in photography, and he would invite anybody that wanted to come over there, and he would critique the photos. But the thing about flash, he hated the looks of flash photos. And so, and I learned from him to take pictures with flash where it didn't look like it. He did a lot of bouncing off of ceilings, and he would carry around a white cardboard board to bounce off of it. And of course, in that one shot, he had his wife. He sometimes used 2 or 3 flashes, but he was a delightful man, just delightful. And you know, he hated being related to painters, though. He loved painting, and he loved photography, but he said photography is the descriptive art. And he said it's not a surprise the minute photography came along that painters started going more abstract. But very interesting guy and a wonderful guy.
What is your name, sir?
Bill Records.
Bill Records. Okay, so I saw Records as your name
Yeah.
on your Zoom. I
think
just
I
wanted to
made it
make
up.
sure. I wanted to say thank you for coming off of mute and talking about that and sharing your personal story. I think that's the exact kind of stories that we were hoping our audience would have to share.
Oh yeah, and he always liked. He didn't like the word photojournalism that's used a lot, because he said a great photograph doesn't need a caption. You know, he says when you look at newspapers, you see captions under everything. But he says a really good photograph can stand on its own without a caption. But I learned a lot from him.
I wish I could have had that experience. That sounds amazing. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So before I ask if anyone else in our audience has anything that they want to share about Lee, there's another question in the chat. So Ray Lynn is asking, did Lee take quick unplanned snapshots of family or friend, or did he always seem to compose and think out each picture?
Of his own family and friends, or
I
I'm
think
not
that's
sure I
what's
understand
meant.
the question.
Ray Lynn, do you want to come off of mute and ask your question? If you're still with us. I think that's what she means.
I think he
she's-
did both. He loved spontaneity, but he would post some photos too.
Mary Jane, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't really. He didn't have qualms about posing someone. You can see the photograph. I believe he took that photograph of Jean. He was, testing his flash and all of that. The more formal one, but he would often pose. It was often candid, but I don't really have too much evidence that he did a lot of family pictures. I don't really, that's not what I've studied, and that's not really what he's left behind,
Yeah. Interesting.
if that answers. It's not really a very good answer. It's a good question.
It is a great question. Yes, it is. And one last question that's in the chat is, where is he buried?
Well, that's a good question, because when I spent quite a long time in Austin and in San Marcos, and I asked everyone, no one could tell me. So
It's a mystery.
his family plot is in Ottawa, Illinois. That's where his mother, his grandmother, grandfather, his aunt, a lot of his family plot is in Ottawa, but he is not there.
Wow. So Dorothy, maybe that's a research assignment you can take on. So we still have some time. So I want to invite now members of our audience that may want to come off mute and share a comment or maybe a brief little story that you have. Please feel free to do that now. We've got a couple of, we've got all the way till 7:30. So
This is Ed Lear, and I was a student of his, and just wanted to say that one of the projects which he supported a lot was the University of Missouri photo workshop, where they I would say probably the best photographers of all the newspapers wanted to attend that. It was once a year in Missouri, and they picked a different town each year to cover. And so he was essentially a very good supporter of teaching other newspaper photographers or regular photographers how to put nice picture stories together. So they spent a week shooting a town, and each of them had to pick out a story, and then they would be critiqued at night. And it was a great teaching adventure that he was probably he and the best photographers from National Geographic and the University of Missouri were the people who put the thing together, and it was really educational. So he spread his information around on how to do things, and critiqued all the pieces with the other major photographers who were there. Just thought that would be of interest to you.
Yeah, that's I'm glad that you brought that up. This talk was focused on Texas. I wanted to bring that in. But he started that with Stryker, and Cliff Odom, I think was his name, who started that, was actually inspired by Stryker and his project. And he developed that kind of concurrently, and Lee and Stryker went there together for the first few years, and then Lee continued it, and it was really important to him. So I'm glad that you added that in. He was very generous with his knowledge and his time.
There was one occasion on his evenings inviting people over that he surprised us with Walker Evans, who was another one of those photographers who I just admired so much. And I remember we stayed up till 4 a.m. listening to them talk and tell stories, and it was amazing. And some of the stories you couldn't repeat, but they enjoyed themselves, both of them.
Good. That's good.
Thank you so much, Ed. That was wonderful to hear you share that story. Anybody else on our audience that would like to come off mute? Is Paige with us? Paige of THC, are you here with us this evening?
Yes,
She
I'm
is
here.
not. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm with my mother.
Hi, Paige.
Hello.
I know you have some sort of connection, so I wanted to shine the spotlight on you for a moment.
Hello. Yes, actually, this is my mother, Kit Newman, and my dad, her husband, was actually Rusell Lee's student teacher for many years.
Wow.
Wow.
And so with that knowledge, he actually taught me photography based on Russell's practice. And so that was a special connection. And my mom, Les, Bill shared going over to his house, hanging out with friends.
Yes, we knew both Mr. Lee and Jean, personal friends. I still have what they gave us for a wedding gift. And he was a
Wow.
special, special man, generous, fun, always pleasant. He was a wonderful teacher in the art department. A lot of us were in the jewelry lab when the photography students were in the photo lab, and then we'd all get together and have a really good time. And yeah, it was terrific. Loved him.
It seems like he was such a generous and well-loved person.
Yes, always.
Thank you so much, Kit and Paige, for the sharing that. I can see it with my mind's eye so clearly. Anyone else would like to? One question, somebody's asking if this will be available on demand. Yes, and so I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, but just for those who joined us late, everybody who registered for this event will get an email from me tomorrow, and it will have a link to a recording of tonight's presentation, as well as some other information, hopefully some, links maybe to the Library of Congress, or at least some more information. So watch your spam folders. Sometimes our emails go into spam or junk, but you should be getting an email from me, and I will go ahead and put my email address right here in the chat. So if you don't hear from me, you can feel free to contact me directly, and I will help you. Anyone else have a comment or a thought? MW says, it was mentioned he had a great inheritance. Where did the money come from?
From his grandmother and his great uncle. And they were his first two guardians after his mother died, but they died in pretty quick succession. And they both left him sizable inheritances.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Did he use his inheritance to go, like, do you know at what point of his life the inheritance came through? Like, did he use that to go to college, or use that to fund different?
Oh, yeah, he received well, the first part when his grandmother died, when he was, I want to say, to think about it, he was 15. And then when his uncle died, his great uncle, so by the time he was 21, he had guardians throughout, legal guardians, and the courts looked after his financial interests for him. And then he had control of his finances when he turned 21.
Oh, so he was pretty young.
It's
He was a young
it's
man.
yeah, it's all in my Rusell Lee book, the Rusell Lee, A Photographer's Life and Legacy. It goes into great detail
And we will include a link to where folks can purchase that
Okay.
in our email tomorrow. So if you'll let me know,
Okay.
we'll share that with everyone, because I'm sure folks would love to get a copy and take a look at that. So, all right. Last call. Any other comments or questions for Lee biographer Mary Jane Appel?
You're going to get a lot of book sales out of this.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you very much, Lee. This was terrific.
Someone's asking how many photographs are in the new book.
oh, there are 112 plates, and then there are figures within the essay.
And I had a question back to the map that you showed, that you had
Mhm.
you'd created and done all the little spots. Is that in your book?
No, that was a research tool, but it was really the best way that everyone loves those maps. And I have a
Yeah.
calendar too of I tracked his every day of every month that he was in the FSA. But those were just tools so that I could get a handle on, the trends in what he was photographing, because some of his work, he might work on a series that would take him a year to complete. It wasn't just a single day. So that was just really to share so that people could kind of get it. It was the quickest way, the quickest, most visual way I could show this is where he went around Texas.
I
So,
love it. And I totally agree with Mary, who just commented it'd be fun to see the map and the calendars in the book. So maybe a future book.
oh,
Maybe a future project could include that. Or a website.
yeah,
We'd like to see it.
I've given talks to students in writing programs and universities and things, and they always like to see those tools. So I always take them with me, and it's just one way of working.
Yeah. And it's so helpful for us because we get to take that journey with you when we're looking at that map. We're taking that journey around Texas with you and thinking about it in that way. And it's wonderful. And I imagine the same is true with the calendars that you have. It's just taking us sort of temporally along his journey.
Mhm.
Dorothy's asking, are there wall calendars of his pictures, and did he have children? I don't know about the wall calendars.
Yeah, I can't speak to the wall calendars. And he did not have children with Doris nor with Jane. So.
Yeah. All right. So again, Mary Jane, I'll once this presentation's over, have to show you all of the wonderful comments that are in the chat, thanking you for this excellent program and complimenting the presentation and the way that you've shown all the different photographs around Texas and his work, and helped us understand the deeper layers of what we're seeing. It's sometimes hard for us, I think, to understand all the tiny little details and subtleties that the photographs have, but you helped us see that, and we're grateful for that. So
Thank you. It was my pleasure. My pleasure.
Any last comments? If not, I think we will say good night. I want to remind everyone we do have another virtual event coming up at the end of March, March 28th. I will include in my email that I send out tomorrow a link to that if you want to register and join us for a presentation on Route 66. This is going to be presented by Selah Motor Casper. She is the executive director of a nonprofit called Latinos in Heritage Conservation, and her presentation is going to be focusing on the Hispanic history of Route 66 and kind of telling stories that maybe we haven't heard before. So definitely want to invite you all to join us for that, and for every month beyond that, for which we will have a virtual presentation. So please follow us on Facebook or visit our website or email me directly and make a friend. I would be happy to talk with you and share more about what we do and these virtual events. So I will email you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful night. Thank you, Mary Jane.
Thank you. Good night.